And so, how did you find it comparatively in Palestine? Let us, reflect on that for a second. You've gone from the land of opportunity to a war zone.
Yeah.
And you're telling me that you felt more comfortable in the war zone on $8,000 a year.
Well, you realize the lie you've been living under. It's not the land of opportunity any more than any other country is. It's no better than any other country in the world. And there's countries that I would much rather live in. I never intend to go back because it's not a desirable location. But when I was in Palestine, I was free from all of these financial
burdens, then just everyone out there to try to take your cash, basically to grab your cash.
Yeah, and I was in an environment where I could literally leave cash out and turn and maybe go in the other room and come back and it's still there. I mean, and I also taught in Iraq. I was in northern Iraq for 9 years, and we'd go down the street and there would be tables with cash stacked up, different currencies, because it was exchange tables, and it was very, informal, but guys just doing it without the infrastructure, without the overhead. And there was never a worry of any money going missing.
Isn't that a good feeling?
Yes, and there were no police around. I never saw police.
So no police and people regulating themselves, just like Palestine.
Just like Palestine. You didn't have those kind of problems.
Shops were just left with all the produce and the doors open at night.
And like in America, I could go down the street, I'd walk and I'd look at someone and they'd, what are you looking at? And that happened quite often. I'm like, geez, no, nothing. And people looking for fights all the time. And that's gone. That's been out of my life for 17 years.
You've made me think now that that's a very, very important psychological thing. That it's a kind of pressure that's on you all the time.
Yeah.
And it's subliminal. I mean, it's subconscious. It's not actually, you're not thinking about that, but the fear of crime, the fear of people going to mug you, take your cash off you, rob your house, rob your car.
Yeah.
It's constantly there. You can't, for example, if you ride a bike, you can't just leave your bike anywhere.
No.
You can't just leave you've got to make sure you lock your car, alarms on. There's nothing, too important or too valuable in there. And there's something psychological about that state of constant fear.
I did have a bike and I had a chain and I locked it up one time, but I didn't lock up one of the wheels. And I came out, the wheel was gone. And, people looked at me and said, well, don't you know you have to lock that up too?
Yeah.
No, I didn't really, but there's people that are going around looking to steal anything.
Yeah.
And
And there's that constant fear. And that's what I said when Anila came here from Houston, Texas. And she came here and she saw I always left the doors open.
Yeah.
Right? And she was like, what are you doing? And I said, I've never locked the doors here in 16 years that I've been here.
Yeah.
And I never, I leave the key in the car running everywhere, wherever you go. And there's no fear. There's no fear that, of any crime or anything. And I even remember in Cyprus, me and Kareem, that's my son, by the way, when he was about 8 or 9 years of age, we used to walk to the village shop, right? And we'd go to the village shop and you'd go in the shop and everything was there. I mean, high value goods as well, right? In the shop.
Uh-huh.
You go in, there's no one there. Uh-huh. And there'd be a sign there and it said, if anyone comes in, just come and knock the next door house, I'm in there. Uh-huh. And everything's in the shop, right? And I used to think, that's amazing, you know? Like, I mean, they could literally, and there were poor people there, right?
Yeah.
But there was a kind of level of trust, a level of community. So you went into the next house.
It's called civilization.
And you went into the next house, knocked the door, And the lady would come out. She'd just give me a minute, and then you pick your goods and everything,
Yeah.
and then put them on the and her cash register is there with the money in it. You know, and there was that level of trust.
Yeah. Well, it's not that way in most of America. Maybe if you go into some of the small towns, I imagine maybe, but
Yeah, I mean, you've touched a point there, because the UK is also the same in many ways. You know, there is that kind of fear, and there's all this constant. I felt that as well when I moved to Palestine, that all that burden of bills and tax and VAT and local taxes. And even if you wanted to just have a car, it was so difficult.
the IRS was always hovering. Like, every year, I think it was April 15th, I think is the day. People got scared. They were really stressed out. If you missed that deadline, then you'll be audited, and it was a big deal. Financial penalty, and you would hear stories, and I believe the stories. People that were audited, they just a minor infraction, charged a lot of money, and I think the IRS wanted these stories out there to make fear the motivating drive for people to comply. But who needs that,
I think, because I remember being in Palestine and going back to Glasgow a few times, and people saying to me, sorry, aren't you scared in Palestine on the West Bank?
Yeah.
And I said, no, I'm not scared at all. I'm scared here, though.
Yeah.
Because at least in the West Bank, the soldiers were wearing uniforms and you knew who the enemy was, right?
Yeah.
You knew who they were, right? And in Glasgow, you could be walking along a street and some lunatic just takes a knife out and puts a knife in your back for no reason,
Well,
and I know people will think that's really, far-fetched, but it isn't,
well, I mean, in Louisville, Kentucky, you had, what was her name? The woman shot in her apartment.
Yeah, I know you're talking the kind of ex-police officer, that one?
No, she was, what was her name? I don't remember now. Black woman.
Yeah, but she was
a nurse.
Right.
Studying to be a nurse.
Okay.
I mean, the gun violence is incredible. There's a mass shooting daily in the U.S. now. The police are violent. You're really in danger of just being pulled over or being stopped for a minor infraction, and it could mess up your life.
But, do you not think that, I always thought about this, that, you don't really get all of that until you actually move out of it. You don't
Some of
really,
it,
you don't get a lot of that. You don't get the psychological stress. You don't get the kind of financial stress. You don't get the idea of, for example, take a small thing like bank charges. We used to have banks in the UK, and you could leave, say, £10 in there, and by the end of a couple of months, it would be minus 20. And no one could explain why.
Well,
there would be charges and stuff put on there.
Well, what happened to me was I had a bank account, and I closed the account because I was opening up this. It was called a federal. What was it called? It was anyway. I changed banks that was associated with the post office, and I closed my account. And years later, I tried to open an account in Florida, and they told me I couldn't because they said I'd never closed this account. It had incurred charges from having for having no funds in it. And so when I tried to track it down, this bank had been acquired twice. It was no longer the same bank, and then I left the country. So if I went back to the U.S. and tried to open a bank account, I couldn't. And another thing that happened, I had a car, a very fine working Lincoln Continental, no body damage. It was looked fine, it ran fine, and I left it parked on the street legally in front of my apartment. And I took a trip one time and came back, and there was a red tag in my car. And it said, the car appears to be abandoned. Now, I was gone maybe 2 weeks. So I took the sticker off. It said, if you don't move it by a certain time, it'll be towed. So maybe a week later, it got red tagged again. Well, eventually, they did tow it away. I never saw the car again.
They just stole it, basically.
It was, I mean, I would have had to go down and pay a lot of money to get it out of, and by this point, I just had it. This is when I was leaving the U.S. I left the U.S. with no car and no bank account. Crawling on my hands and knees.
Trying to get out of there, yeah, because they would have been at your ankles
And
trying to pull you back in.
I'd done nothing but work as hard as I could for my entire life. And this is the kind of stuff I was facing.
And with that, we'll leave it there.
Okay.
But I think that kind of unfolds and unravels a few of the things that you were saying previously, at least minimally, and gives us something to kind of think about for the next one.
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Take it easy.
All right.
Peace out.
Peace out.